having us. We're really excited to be here. Just a quick note, because I know I have a lot of family that are not in the medical field. So just we wanted to touch on what a fellow actually is, because we're both fellows in developmental and behavioral pediatrics. So basically, Dr. Andrade and myself have both completed our pediatrics training, our pediatric residency. And then a fellow is someone who's getting subspecialty training in a different area of medicine. So for us, we're getting subspecialty training in developmental and behavioral pediatrics. So we're both really excited to be here. I'm also a proud mother of 3, which has really influenced my practice over the years. So I thank you for this opportunity, and I'd love to pass it to Dr. Andrade to introduce herself as well.
Thank you. Welcome, everyone. I'm Ashley Andrade. As Dr. Rosciolelli said, I am also a fellow specializing in developmental and behavioral pediatrics. And I echo what Dr. Rosciolelli said as well. We are very excited to be here. So we will jump right in. We do not have any disclosures or conflicts of interest in relation to this presentation. And in terms of our objectives, I won't read through all of these word for word, but generally we are going to start by discussing attachment theory and early relational health and how this impacts relationships between children and caregivers, as well as how to promote positive attachment. And then we're going to describe the 5 critical components of early literacy and talk about some of examples and definitions. Then we're going to talk about some literacy milestones, and then talk about incorporating reading as a routine for children with developmental differences and neurodiversity. And finally, we have some resources at the end for families and for providers to promote these early literacy skills at home and out in the community. So now I'll pass it off to Dr. Rosciolelli to start us off.
So first, we'll talk about the theory of attachment and what that means, and then kind of segue into how that relates to early relational health. So attachment theory, this framework was really first defined by a British psychiatrist, Dr. John Bowlby, back in 1969. And this could be a whole talk on its own, talking about attachment theory. But why we talk about it in relationship to child development is that there's a lot of research and evidence that has kind of based on his theory that the early relationships between children and their caregivers are really critical, and that they can have extremely far-reaching impact, both on early development as well as further out, their long-term trajectories in terms of development. And what it really boils down to is the importance of a secure attachment with a child and their caregiver, and that if there's security in that attachment, that the child is then going to feel secure and confident in exploring their world, knowing that their caregiver is there, dependable, reliable for them, and responsive to their needs. Versus if we have insecure attachment, children become maybe more fearful or more anxious and maybe are less confident, less likely to explore, and that affects them both early on and further out in their development. The next, I think this slide is nice because it kind of talks about applying attachment theory in real life. And so there are a lot of parenting programs are based off of theories of attachment. This is just one example of it. It's called the Circle of Security. And it really kind of is trying to help parents early on with their child learn about child development in a way that's related to the relationship with their child. So it talks about, if you see on the left-hand side of the screen, that the parent or caregiver is really like the secure base for their child, and that they're there to protect them, to comfort them, to delight in their everyday activities with them, and help them with co-regulation and be that kind of calm presence. But as that secure base, if you look at the top half of this oval, it's that they're there to kind of support a child's exploration. So the child, if they have that secure base, they feel comfortable venturing out, exploring their world, learning new things, and knowing, as in the upper right picture, that the parent is there for them if they need them, that they're there to delight in their findings as they're exploring the world and enjoying these experiences with them. And that on the bottom half of the circle is that knowing that parent's always there for them to come back to, and that there's stability in that relationship. And so this is just kind of a practical application of attachment theory. There's many other types of parenting programs that are kind of based off of this, but just wanted to kind of give you an idea of what that looks like and how it can play out in real life. Next, we wanted to talk about early relational health. This is something that's kind of been a framework that's developed over the last more recent kind of decade or so that talks about the importance of the early relationships that children form with their caregivers, as well as other adults that are close in their life, and that these relationships are really critical, and that they form the biological necessities to help create this foundation for a child's lifelong growth and development. And at its core, and the American Academy of Pediatrics has done a lot of work on this, and a lot of leaders in pediatrics are providing evidence to support this. But what it boils down to is that these relationships need to be safe, so free of psychological or physical harm, and children know that their caregivers are there to protect them, that the relationships are stable, so that their adult is dependable, and that they know that they're going to meet their needs, and that it's a nurturing relationship. And so their physical, emotional, and developmental needs are consistently addressed and met. And that's with empathy and warmth and kind of clear, consistent expectations. So why is this important? So more recent data shows that with early relational help and parents and caregivers providing really positive childhood experiences can mitigate the effects of trauma or adverse childhood experiences. And this is really powerful, right? Because sometimes we do our best, but we can't always avoid adverse childhood experiences. But knowing that these positive experiences and strong relationships with their caregivers or other adults in their life can help buffer those experiences and help build resiliency and create adaptive skills, can really be really beneficial and is important. And so we know that these positive childhood experiences help improve both long-term physical and mental health. And it goes both directions in the relationship. So both children and their caregivers experience these positive results of these strong relationships. And we see it in a variety of relationships. So it's not just parent and child. It could be a parent and a grandparent, or another, like a health daycare provider, someone who's kind of a consistent adult in this child's life. So when we talk about what are the positive impacts on the child, so children that have consistent responsive interactions with their caregivers have improved outcomes with regard to their social and emotional well-being. So this is improving their self-regulation skills. They're seeing increased positive emotions, as well as decreased anxiety, an increased ability to identify emotions and empathize with others, and improve social skills. And these are all individually really important things for a child, especially as they're developing through life. And in our clinic, our developmental and behavioral clinic, it's when these areas go awry is a common reason we're seeing children and trying to help support them. So knowing that these strong relationships can really affect their social emotional well-being is really important. And then there's also physical impacts as well. So stronger immune system, decreased risk for asthma, lung infections, and cardiovascular disease. We're seeing more consistent exercise, as well as healthier eating and sleep habits, which is really, really important part of health too. And then the impacts are not, like we said, not just on the child, but positive impacts on the caregiver. So caregivers who engage in responsive caregiving with their young children have also improved outcomes. So also seeing an improvement in their ability to regulate their feelings, increased levels of empathy and social understanding, decreased maternal anxiety, and decreased symptoms of depression, which are really, really important for adults too. And then similarly, positive impact on physical and behavioral health. So improved cardiac health, increased stress resilience, quicker response to infant cues. And they're even finding increased levels of oxytocin, serotonin, and dopamine that are sometimes referred to as the happy hormones, or provide this feeling of well-being. And so these are really significant impacts that we're seeing in both the child and the caregiver from a result of these positive relationships.
So, building on what Dr. Rashioleli has been speaking about, we want to really emphasize that early relational health really comes from these moment-to-moment interactions between caregivers and their children. And these can be as simple as, just singing together, having a happy and fun time together, and can also develop into more complex situations, such as building consistent routines. So this can include a bedtime routine in which, there's a bath, a book, and time for bed. And specifically, reading together is a routine that can build a lot of important skills. So, including language development and early literacy skills, but also empathy and emotional awareness, because reading different books from different perspectives and cultures and lifestyles exposes children, to a variety of different situations, and also can normalize their own feelings and their own different situations that they may be going through. And finally, as Dr. Rosciolelli had mentioned, reading together really builds that trust and connection and strengthens that parent-child bond. So we wanted to include this image because we felt that it kind of encapsulates a lot of wonderful things that come from reading together and emphasizes that something that can be seen as a small interaction can have a big impact. So a couple of things I just wanted to point out included that the caregiver has come down to meet the child at their level. They're both reading together in a comfortable and inviting environment. The caregiver is also pointing at something at the book, so making this interaction much more engaging, perhaps pointing at certain letters or words or characters, and making it an active experience for the child. And as you can see, the child in this picture is very interested in the book as well. So it may be a book that is about something that this child loves, such as trains or certain animals, whatever really engages the child and makes them excited. So from here, we will start discussing the 5 components of literacy. The first one is phonemic awareness. So this is looking at phonemes, which are the smallest units of sound that convey a distinct meaning. So for example, in the word dog, we have 3 distinct phonemes, which consist of the D in dog, the O, and the G. And this is the basic fundamental, approach at looking into literacy because it involves the skill of blending these sounds eventually into words. And as words get more complex, it's really important for the child to be able to use these sounds to sound out words. The second skill is phonics. So phonics are really important to introduce because they let the child know that there is a reliable, organized, and logical pattern to the way that words are spelled and the way that reading is done. So this is really important because it allows the child to eventually be able to recognize words instantly. And in this photo that I have included towards the bottom of the slide, we see a child looking at something called word families. So this is a mechanism of teaching in which the child learns how these different patterns can fit into a variety of different words. So for example, for words that end in IT, they can come up with a lot of different examples such as sit, kit, lit, etc. And so it really helps to incorporate all of these phonics skills. The third is vocabulary. And what is important to know about vocabulary is that there's 4 different categories. So we have the listening and speaking vocabulary, and then we also have a reading and writing vocabulary. And it's important to know that children may have an expansion in these vocabulary categories at different times, and that can all be very developmentally consistent with where they are at. So many times when children are still quite young, their listening and speaking vocabulary may be a lot broader and bigger than their reading and writing vocabulary, but it's still important to kind of allow them to see all these different types of areas, which includes reading and looking at written words as well. Next, we have fluency. So fluency is the ability to read accurately, quickly, and with, nice amount of speed. And this is important because as a child gets older, as they go into elementary school, high school, college, and beyond, the volume that they will be reading will certainly increase. And developing a nice fluency will allow them to, read very quickly without being encumbered. And this also helps motivation in itself because when a child feels confident that they are able to read fluently and can tackle, big words and complex paragraphs, they feel motivated to continue learning and continue just absorbing as many different words and language patterns as possible. And finally, the fifth skill is comprehension. So comprehension can encompass a lot of different things, but at its core, it is actively thinking and reflecting about text. And so for younger children, this can take the form of simple questions that they may be asking themselves or that an adult can help ask as they're reading a book or a story. So these questions can include, I feel such and such, or I wonder if such and such. And this allows them to not only read and pay attention to what is going on in the text, but also think critically about many other aspects of reading. And this is so important for their future learning as, again, they move on to elementary school, high school, and beyond, because as they get to higher levels of education, their skills of comprehension will kind of build on all of those skills as well. And now I'll pass it back to Dr. Rosciolelli to talk about literacy milestones.
So we wanted this just to be, a point of reference for you all. I'll touch on some highlights in the different age groups when we're looking at pre-literacy milestones. So first, our 1-year-olds, we're looking just for some first initial words that carry meaning. And then as we progress, a 15-month-old, we're looking for not only continued vocabulary growing, but their receptive language, or their ability to understand. So when we say a one-step command, like, put that over there, that they can understand the words and follow the instruction without having to show them. So that's getting at, we call their, receptive language. And then as we continue to get older, so a 2 to 3-year-old, we're seeing that the vocabulary is really just growing exponentially. And at 2, we're really looking to see 2-word phrases. So putting words together and forming even short sentences. And that continues to grow as they get to age 3. By age 3, we're seeing almost like too many words to count, but then they're also getting more complex components of language like prepositions, so position in time and space, like of, on top, below. So the complexity of their language is also growing. At 3.5, we're just starting to see the ability to rhyme. Again, this is a really early skill, so we know that, for some kids it might happen a little bit later, but that ability to understand rhyming and try to rhyme with you. At age 4, we're wanting them to recognize letters, and at age 5, associate the sound with the letters, like Dr. Andrade had talked about, and the kind of all the components. And really in kindergarten, really starting to master the sounds that are connected to the letters. And by end of kindergarten, that they can recognize all the letters, upper and lowercase. We wanted to touch on, when you should maybe be a little concerned, and to bring concerns to pediatrician or to the teacher at school based on the age of the child. So in preschool, as we know, literacy is really, if literacy is going awry, a lot of it can be traced back to difficulty with language sometimes. So if there is a delay in a child's speech, that's an important thing to bring to the attention of the teacher and your pediatrician if they're having difficulty following what we say multi-step direction. So that receptive part of their language they're having some difficulty with, or they're having some trouble with rhyming or maybe mispronouncing words. These are important reasons to talk with the teacher. And then, as Dr. Andrade had stressed, the importance of phonemic awareness is a really key building block in literacy. So if that's really hard for them, that's when you want to start getting some additional help, or if they're having trouble, learning the alphabet and the sounds that are tied to the letters. In kindergarten to second grade, and this is where really we're continuing to build on their skills, right? So first there's kind of learning to read, and as we get older, reading to learn, right? So this learning to read skill is really complex. And so if they're having difficulty, again, with recognizing letters and linking the sounds, or that phonemic awareness, or difficulty with kind of simple words, or if you notice that they're frequently substituting words, and then alongside this, if you're also seeing challenges with like spelling and handwriting, these would be reasons to start, a conversation with the teacher in school as well as your pediatrician, because these are complex issues, and these are things we could talk about like a whole separate talk on. And so it really benefits from having both a medical professional as well as school professional kind of helping to better understand what specific areas a child might be struggling with, so it can be best addressed. And then third grade, if we're still seeing and beyond reversing letters and numbers, right, or continued challenges with spelling kind of grade level words, or handwriting that's harder to read or illegible, if you see behaviors around reading, so reading slowly, meaning having trouble with fluency, or maybe if we're seeing behaviors where they're avoiding reading, that can be a really significant concern to help a child address, or if they're having difficulty with comprehension or immediate word recall, or if you're seeing a difference in kind of verbal versus nonverbal subjects. So for example, reading would be considered the verbal subject versus math, as long as it's not like a story problem where they have to read a lot to do the solve the problem. If they're like doing well at grade level or above in math, but really struggling in the verbal areas, that's kind of something to think about. Okay, this isn't across the board we're having troubles, but specifically with regard to reading or writing. And then if you're seeing continued word reversals, tangential speech, or things that kind of goes off track, isn't really following the back and forth of what's in the context of what they're reading, and as well as difficulty with more complex language, so idioms, puns, those types of things would be reasons to talk with the school, and then also with your pediatrician. So I'll pass it to Dr. Andrade to talk about reading with neurodiverse children.
Thank you, Dr. Rosciolelli. So before we begin, we just wanted to make note that a lot of these strategies are hugely taken from the amazing Reach Out and Read tear sheets that they provide. This is an excellent resource that we recommend to families and to providers. They highlight different reading tips, book examples, and even organizations that may be helpful to a family. And so this is a wonderful resource that we will include in our resource slides. So starting off with a child that may have speech and language delay or difficulties, one thing that we really like to emphasize is working on those letter sounds, and repetition is key here. So here I included a picture of the book Brown Bear, What Do You See? That's an example of a book that has a very reliable pattern. And so something that can both keep the child engaged, but also kind of reaffirm these distinct language patterns and sounds are important as well. And then other things like rhyming and songs can really help, build those skills in a fun, interactive way. In terms of developmental delay, children with developmental delay may have different challenges, including speech, but also fine motor skills. So that is related to the small muscles of the hands, the fingers, and the wrists, as well as gross motor skills. So this involves the larger muscles of the arms and legs. And so looking at books that are interactive, that have bright colors, that are visually appealing can be really helpful. Another thing is looking at books that have nice, thick, sturdy pages. So some that are more like board books can be a little bit easier to maneuver for a child with fine motor difficulties. And then Reach Out and Read also had some sign language introduction, which is a great idea as well. Just kind of incorporating a different way to use communication. In terms of autism spectrum disorder, one thing that we really like to emphasize is thinking about books that uh, try to build on social skills as well as feelings. So, some great examples include the book Lots of Feelings. It has a lot of, faces. It can be quite interactive as well. And it really helps the child to start identify some of those early social skills that they can use. Another idea for books includes books that have the sibling perspective. So specifically in the bottom right corner, we have the book called My Brother Charlie. And that is really nice because it shows the perspective from a sibling of someone who is on the spectrum. And so again, this is normalizing an experience and validating any feelings that children may have. And then the other thing that we like to point out is really choosing books based on a child's interests. So if a child is particularly interested in trains, for example, going to the library and looking for books about trains, maybe expanding that a little bit more and looking at books about traveling to a place on a train, etc. All of that can really help keep the child really engaged and interested. In terms of ADHD and executive function differences, we want to try to minimize distractions as much as possible, but also recognize that children with ADHD may need frequent breaks. So, dividing reading into small chunks of time is really helpful. Audiobooks are also a wonderful resource for any child, but for children with ADHD, sometimes having an audiobook on in the background while maybe they work on a puzzle or something that is a little bit, not as complex, might be a nice way for them to get some of that listening in. Making reading interactive is really key here. So involving the body, making different animal sounds, acting out parts in the book, all of that makes reading really engaging. And really importantly, for any child, but for a child with ADHD, praising them is really important when you do see them reading. We know that children with ADHD may hear no a lot during their day. They may be told, okay, please sit down, or, stay here. And so getting that praise is really important to build their confidence and to build their self-esteem as well. And then finally, in terms of learning difficulties, again, rhyming and similar patterns are really important. So, for example, towards the bottom left, there's the book called Llama Llama Red Pajama. That is something that is really fun to say and engaging for children. And again, it emphasized some of those early phonics skills, along with tapping out syllables playfully can be really helpful. And then even, taking the time to maybe draw a scene from a book or, incorporate art in some way can help as well. Because it kind of helps the child to use maybe a different part of their brain to still learn some of these literacy concepts. And I'll pass it off to Dr. Rashialeli.
So next, we want to talk about implementation strategies. So kind of everything we've talked about, how can we incorporate that into everyday life, right? Everybody's got busy, active lives with kids. So we're going to go through things within the routine and environment, as well as some play-based, multi-sensory ideas, and then community experiences. So when we look at the routine and environment, there's a really great article that was just published in the American Academy of Pediatrics that talks about the importance of promotion of literacy, and it even highlights the importance of early relational health as well. And within that article, they talked about the 5 R's of early learning. And so the first one is reading daily, and this can be really hard in a busy life. And so we talk about, if you have 15 minutes, great, but even if it's 5 minutes, 5 minutes one-on-one with your child, or if you have multiple children, reading together is a great experience. So just trying to incorporate that into the routine every day. A lot of times, like Dr. Andrade had said, it's kind of can be part of a bedtime routine, is like a nice calming way to implement this. Rhyming, we've talked about, right, is really key. Early literacy milestone, but it also can be fun. So you can do rhyming through playing, talking, singing, cuddling together, being silly with it, is a nice way to bring that into the day. And it could be, just something you're doing at breakfast or on a walk or things like that. So it's just kind of bringing that fun into your everyday. And then we all know, all of us, adults included, do well with routines, and kids are no different, in that there's importance of having regular routines in terms of times for mealtime, playtime, sleeping, and so they know what's coming next, and that's a great time to build reading into the routine, like we said, into like the bedtime routine is probably one of the really classic ways to do it. I think number 4 talks about reward for everyday successes. This doesn't mean you need to go purchase anything for your child. It's a reward is simply a lot of what in developmental behavioral pediatrics is we say positive reinforcement. And so when a child is trying to learn something new or do a skill that might be hard for them, or is the first time that they're doing it, there's a very strong effect of what we say labeled praise. So, and which is very specific praise. Wow, you're working so hard on drawing that letter, or you're working so hard on sounding that word out. And really, all of us respond well to label praise when you're really trying hard and that's getting recognized. And so that's a really great way to continue to build up a child's confidence in these skills, as well as reinforce what they're learning and what they're trying. And then this whole talk, we've talked about, relationships are so important, that are reciprocal and nurturing and purposeful. And that's a really critical foundation for a healthy brain and child development. And then next, just thinking about the home environment, right? So everybody wants things to be kind of cozy and inviting, especially when we're trying to like settle down to read. And so having it doesn't need to be fancy. Like a reading nook could be just like some pillows and a blanket on the ground that's cozy. Maybe it has like a lovey that they like, or something that is really inviting to the child. And then that books are around the house and accessible. And again, books are expensive. So what I like to do is go to the public library and have the child, like Dr. Andrade said, pick out books that are interesting about topics, just get a whole bag of them. If there's any librarians online, as far as I know, I don't think there's any significant restriction. You can get a ton of books at the library, bring them home, have a bin for them, so you can helps you keep track of them, but also so that they're easily accessible for your child. And then I think it's always fun to have kind of like an activity bag or an on-the-go bag, because I know we're in such a screen device world. It's so easy sometimes just to give your child a device just for kind of quick transitions or things like that. But really trying to build some of these kind of early literacy skills by having a little bag on the go that's maybe got books that they like, has writing things, crayons, things that you're okay maybe with them taking with you on the go, and they could be part of making it. And then it just kind of sits at the door. So when it's time to go, it's kind of prepackaged and ready to go. And that they kind of took part in putting it together. The other, really important thing, and the screens are just ever present in our world. And it takes effort sometimes, I think, to shut them off in a way, myself included. And so sometimes taking that extra step is like putting the cell phone face down away, or, in the other room when you're reading with your child, so that you're not competing. Or even if there's a TV on, I know a lot of families will say, well, it's just kind of background noise, which is really true. But for reading, just not, so you're not competing with something else on a screen that can be kind of a distractor. And then just letting children see adults reading. So reading, print, ideally something that they can tell you're reading, not just on your phone. So like, a magazine or a book or something, because kids are always paying attention and watching what we're doing as adults. So kind of modeling the behaviors and things we want to see is a really strong way also to reinforce them. And then the next thing is just talking about play-based multisensory ways to implement it. Is all of us learn best when we're having fun. So making this fun, and everything doesn't have to be sitting down and reading a book. Yes, we want that as part of the daily routine, but there's so many other ways to foster these skills of early literacy. I think one of my favorites is music and movement, because you're engaging all these different senses, right? So you have, your auditory sense with the music, or even if they have instruments that you're playing with, you visual, like a lot of times they'll have scarves or other things, your movements you're doing. So your visual part of the brain is lighting up, and then the movements, right? So we're incorporating all these elements. So your, auditory, visual, motor parts of the brain are all lighting up. And these are all important things that are needed also for reading. And so it's a really fun way. A lot of times there's lots of rhyming that's going on and silly dance moves and things. So it can be a really great way to engage children early on. And a lot of these programs are at your local library, or you can just put a song on at home and do it with your kid at home and be fun and silly at home. So I think that's a really nice one that is both multisensory and play-based. The other thing is just it's all good for all of us to get outside. So taking it outdoors, and that is like another kind of sensory immersion, right? So there's all the beauty of nature surrounding you, and you can make it fun. Like, I just put an example of like, I spy something that, starts with the letter B, or maybe you could find sticks that are shaped like different letters. And so you can have lots of fun with these activities. As kids are starting to kind of work on their fine motor skills and letter identification using different media. So a lot of kids may have different sensory interests as well as sensory sensitivity. So being respectful of what works best for your child is important. And so, it could be sand, it could be shaving cream, or it could be like you put that element into like a Ziploc bag and they trace it through the bag, whatever works best for your child. But there's different ways you can make it fun and kind of more experiential to learn these skills. So we've put links within this page as well that kind of leads you to some other activities that kind of are multisensory and play-based. And then kind of, community experiences. You do not need to reinvent the wheel. There are so many wonderful programs out there. And I'm maybe a little bit biased. So my mother is a retired children's librarian. And so I got the benefit of her. After she'd come home from work, she'd bring a bag of books. And I mean, she always had this saying, simple toys, complex thoughts. And there's so many great things beyond just books at the library, right? So they have so many wonderful programs for all ages, and they have a lot of community resources. It's a great way for other parents to meet each other, and for their child to really learn a lot of different skills. And so I always encourage families to check out your local public library. You can, if your child's under 14, as long as you sign up, they can get their own card. And that's really empowering as a child to have your own library card and check out your own books and all of that. They also have museum passes and STEM kits. So there's so many great, I feel like our libraries are underutilized sometimes. And so there's so many great resources to check out there. And then, your local park district also has a lot of great early childhood learning programs. So just kind of looking at the resources in your community and helping, build their kind of experiential learning, as well as it's nice for caregivers to kind of get out of the home and meet other caregivers. And it's an opportunity for just building community. That Every Child Ready to Read is a national program. You may see it at the library. So a lot of the librarians have a vast amount of experience in recommending if you need help with something, or, Dr. Andre talked about looking at books about emotions or other skills, maybe your child trying to foster in your child. So lots of really great resources. Which leads us towards the end of just some additional resources. The links to all of these resources will be provided. So as you all know, we love Reach Out and Read. We use it every day in our clinic, and there's so many great resources for families and providers within their website. As I've talked about, libraries are a wealth of resources. And then there's additional early literacy. Reading Rockets is one that I use a lot in clinic. And then most pediatricians know healthychildren.org has a lot of great resources. So there's so many great early literacy resources out there, but even resources for adults too. And then wanting to speak more specifically about resources for maybe neurodiverse children or children with learning disabilities. At the kind of the general level, understood.org, Child Mind Institute, and LD Online have a lot of really great information and resources. Now, if you're looking more for something more specific, like helping a child who has been diagnosed with a reading disability such as dyslexia or things like that, the Center for Effective Reading Instruction, in terms of trying to find a reading specialist or someone to help your child that has expertise in one of the kind of evidence-based reading strategies that can help a child with a learning disability is really critical to help support them. Redwood Literacy is a local organization that does do both assessments and provides intervention, reading intervention. But there's other resources out there. This is not an exhaustive list, but just to kind of get you started. And then with regard to children with ADHD, I love the Attitude podcast, have some really nice kind of expert-led podcasts that you can listen to on your commute or when you're, traveling, that gives kind of, you can pick what's most relevant to you in your life. So just lots of great resources out there that we just wanted to highlight a few. And I'll pass it to Dr. Andrade to talk about some more online resources.
Thank you. Yes, as Dr. Rashiolali had mentioned, we try to emphasize screen-free time as much as possible, but also recognize that we live in a very connected world, and there are many times where these apps and websites can be very valuable. So we wanted to kind of highlight a couple that we find are really engaging and educational. Starting on the left-hand side, PBS Kids is a really nice website. A lot of the games and activities that they have on there are education related, but PBS Kids also has a separate parenting or parents only site. And that has a lot of activities that are offline that you can do, kind of with your child. Lots of different coloring things and things to emphasize early literacy skills. So we really like that website. In terms of audiobooks or hearing a story being read out loud, both Circle Round and Storyline are online are great options. Circle Round is something that Dr. Rashiolali actually recommended to me. So it's a podcast that is produced by the NPR at Boston. And they emphasize different audiobooks that promote, kindness, honesty, friendship. And they also come along with different activities that families can do once they finish the audiobook. So that's a really nice way to remain engaged. And similarly, Storyline Online is both a website and a YouTube channel that features different actors reading a book out loud, along with some, fun music and different illustrations from the book as well. So that's another great resource. We also have Khan Academy Kids listed here and Teacher Monster. These are both websites that teach basic literacy skills. And Khan Academy Kids has a free app that is also available for different tablets. And then finally, building on what Dr. Rashiolali said about libraries and the amazing resources that they provide, Hoopla, Overdrive, and Libby are all different ways that you can download either ebooks or audiobooks to your devices. So again, really kind of focusing on, going to the library, and even if it's just virtually, it's just a really nice way to get some of these resources. And with that, we are wrapping it up. So we really want to thank you so much for being present for our presentation, and we can open it up for questions and comments.
So we did receive one question while you were all talking. So either of you can answer this, or you can both answer this together. The question comes from Dr. Julie O'Keefe. It is, do you have any thoughts or data on why fewer and fewer children in the United States are meeting the milestone of, quote, mastering the sounds that letters make, quote, less and less frequently in the past several years?
I'm happy to talk. I don't have all of the data that my fingertips, but I think that's an excellent question. And I feel like this trend over time has been really concerning. I think that, and I saw someone had mentioned that podcast Sold a Story. And I think, and I'm not a teacher, so if there's any teachers, feel free to jump in. But I feel though, in some situations, the way that reading was taught in schools wasn't always phonics based. And so there is a lot of really great data about the science of reading and how children learn to read and incorporating all of the things that Dr. Andrade had covered. And if the way a child is initially taught doesn't incorporate all of those elements, then that could certainly impact their ability to learn to read and their reading proficiency. And I know like our national report card is not so great. So there's a component of the curriculum that a child is taught. My understanding is and what I've experienced as a pediatrician is there's not consistency among schools sometimes. And I know as a parent, I wouldn't have been able to tell you what reading curriculum was being used in my child's school. And I have a child with dyslexia, and that really opened my eyes a lot to the variation among how reading is taught. I think there's a lot. The good news is that I think with that Soul to Story podcast, that things are changing, and that because there is such good data on how kids learn to read and best ways, practices to do that, that at the policy level, that changes are being made. And I think the state of Mississippi is a nice example where they changed their reading curriculum and how it was being delivered to children, and their reading scores of their children improved. That's just one example. I think it's a very complex question. I think the pandemic certainly had an impact, right? So if you had kids at those critical grades, kindergarten through second grade, that were doing things online, it was just, it's not a replacement. We all know not a replacement for learning, especially at these key stages of literacy development. And so I think sure that had an impact, and we certainly have seen it in our practice. But would welcome any other experts that are on this call that could speak to it. But that's just kind of my understanding of some of it, is how a child is being taught to read is really important. And that I think the states and government starting to take notice, and hopefully that seems like it's starting to change.
I also just wanted to add that there's a lot of ongoing research about what the effects of screens and screen time have on children and their early development, um, especially their early language development. I saw an article recently. I will try to put it into our resources, but I saw an article recently looking at the amount of hours that a child was exposed to for screen time, and then comparing that to their level of language, social skills, and self-regulation skills. And what the researchers found was that as the amount of hours increased, they were also seeing some difficulty and challenges with some of these skills, specifically language, which is what I think the question had asked about. And so I think we as pediatricians, of course, we want to meet families where they are at and recognize that screens are a part of our day to day, but also really try to give strategies to try to step away from screens. And reading is exactly that, really trying to build those active skills that a child needs for their language development and reading.
Perfect. Thank you both so much. I feel like you handled that question incredibly. I feel so informed. We have one more question, and I think that this will be our last question, and then we'll wrap up. So this comes from Katie. She's looking for research related to literacy, bilingual education when language one is decreased, or when the parent's language and literacy skills are limited. How does that impact a child's acquisition of language and reading along with speech language acquisition?
I can begin to answer that one. So I am bilingual myself. I'm a native Spanish speaker. And I just wanted to make a quick note that lots of research has shown that being exposed to two languages in the home does not hinder a child's ability to speak either language. So yes, we see that sometimes early on, children may replace, one word in one language for another and kind of have a bit of confusion, but that period usually is goes by, and then they are able to still kind of switch languages when appropriate. So I just wanted to make a quick note of that. As far as more research related to specifically literacy and bilingualism, that's something that I would have to look into a bit more. But one resource that I really love is Colorín Colorado, which is related to reading rockets. I may actually go back to that slide. Yes, Colorín Colorado is a really great resource, specifically supporting children that are both bilingual in Spanish and English. So that is something that I always offer to our families.
And then one thing the second part of that question asking, if a parent's language or literacy skills are limited, how does that impact a child's acquisition? I think empowering the parent with, ways to do a lot of these early literacy skills with their child in ways that are comfortable for them. But I think it's also important to know that a lot of like learning disabilities, there's a strong genetic base for, so that it doesn't mean that that child will develop those, but they're certainly at risk. And so wanting to be proactive and supporting both the parent and the child, and knowing that they might need additional intervention or resources early on could be really impactful for that child. So just kind of recognizing, empowering and supporting the parent, but also kind of keeping a closer eye on that child as well, just from their inherent risk.
Thank you both. And I would also like to highlight that lots of resources have been shared in the chat, as well as the resources that were shared in the presentation themselves. These will all be shared in a follow-up email to all of you who registered and attended, as well as those who just registered but were unable to attend. And with that, we will kind of wrap up. So I just want to thank Dr. Rusciolelli and Dr. Andrade for their time today and their expertise in this subject area. It was really incredible and enlightening to hear from you both. I'd also like to invite you all to join us for our upcoming webinar series on April 17th from 12 to 1 p.m. about building resilience through community partnerships. So this webinar is a part of the ACEs webinar series that ICAP is doing. And you can find more information about it at our website, which I just posted in the chat, as well as an upcoming listening session on June 17th about rallying your clinic's Reach Out and Read team. That's specific for Reach Out and Read practicing clinics, about a staff refresher course that we are piloting and offering at the Reach Out and Read level. But thank you so much, both of you, and I hope that everybody has a great rest of your day. Stay safe and be happy today.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
You.